So with Frédéric, it's a very fun collaboration because working on AI, so working on the algorithms, designing algorithms, you can get actually very excited. It's an incredible power. You all know that. What we can do nowadays in our human times, and we are living through a very tough time with the COVID-19, and we can still have these kind of conferences. We can still, the service industry, for the most part, can still be turned on, can be still making business. For the manufacturing industry, it's a little more complicated, but it's working anyway. So all these technologies and the architecture innovation we are going through, we are using nowadays, definitely helps humanity. So with different degrees. I mean, again, I'm not saying it's wonderful, but with different degrees across the world, we in 2020 we are the best generation in terms of technological equipment and responses to face a global pandemic, if you see what I mean. So again, I wish we did not have this pandemic, but there are reasons to be optimistic about it. Research networks are organizing themselves and so on. So I don't know about the sound, so if I'm doing something wrong, the sound is terrible on my side, so I don't know if it's okay with you.
No, we can understand, Professor. For us, it's perfect.
Fine.
For you, it's fine. Okay. For me, it's it's like I am in a construction facility. So
maybe it's better, Professor Marty, use some headphones.
Yes.
Can you use that, Professor?
I will try to use them.
Okay, maybe it can help. So I also have my headphones actually, so
or mute your microphone as well.
So I'm going to put my headphones as well. Oh, here we are. Maybe one. So and I'm praising actually the technology, even if it doesn't work 100% on my side. So, but anyway, so it's I think it's important to step back and realize that we are at an incredible level of technological equipment, and it brings a lot of great benefits. And again, COVID-19 is an example. So we can cope as much as we can, but we can cope with these pandemics. And 20 years ago, it would not have been the same story. You can imagine. So in a way, actually, it brings AI, telecommunications, and so on, bring a lot of positive benefits. On the other side, it raises also a lot of questions, and that's our research project with Frédéric. So, are we equipped in competition policy? Are we equipped in terms of jurisprudence? Are we equipped in terms of legal traditions to understand and to accompany? We don't want to forbid. First reaction should not be let's forbid, but to accompany. And are we ready also to make tough decisions, to regulate, to balance, regulate in the sense of balance all these great benefits we can get from this architectural innovation, this new paradigm, and are we also ready to re-regulate our institutions, if you see what I mean? So are we ready to adapt our competition policies, and to what extent? So those are fundamental questions, and they are very important questions, and we are the generation that has to address these questions. I mean, we should not be lazy about these questions, because in 100 years from now, if it's not the US, or if it's not Canada, or if it's not Brazil, but if it's called I don't know, Amazon country, or CGI in Canada, CGI country, maybe our great grandkids will look at us and say, what did you do? I mean, how come you didn't know about that? I mean, how come you didn't realize that one vehicle of our capitalist societies has dominated all the other vehicles? So why didn't you think about the new balance? Why didn't you understand the trends and the incredible power of what you had in your hands? So it's really to me, actually, as a citizen, it's really fundamental questions, and we have a little bit of expertise in this domain, so it's our responsibility to think about it and to have the right diagnostic and to propose the right solutions, and then democracies should play, and the other citizens should vote and decide. But it's fundamentally a change in doctrine, or at least a question about the change in doctrine, and what should we do? So we should not underestimate the magnitude of the changes. And I was yesterday, we were actually with Frédéric, we were talking about the pace and how actually AI distorts time. So it's almost a boson time, so it's almost going closer to the generation of information, and it's fantastic. So if I go down actually on this slide, if I yes, yes, so that's what I'm going to quickly talk about. So if you go back to the generation, if you go closer to the generation of information, it's all about information. You get an incredible competitive advantage. And that's fine. But the challenge is, can the others actually catch up? Can we create a healthy and fair competitive environment? Because if you're the first one to win, actually, to be at the starting block, maybe you will, by default, in a sense, by nature, by the dynamics of the game, you will actually win just because you were the first one to realize that you had to be at the starting block. So, and the others will follow. So in competition policies, they will follow how? Well, by reading the signals. And that's what we put in the first slides, actually, about the cartel management. And we will also send signals as being the first one at the starting block. So that's all the anti-competitive agreements. We will also, through our technology, produce information. So the AI produce collusions through machine learning. And in the literature, we are seeing a lot of that. So, and also the algorithm as a messenger. So how do we communicate? I mean, how do we send the message? And so at the end of the day, what it does, what it can do, and what it does in some ways, I mean, we're starting to see some jurisprudence about it, and Frédéric will talk about that. We are observing anti-competitive practices. So a couple of examples. A first case in the 1990s, the air traffic publishing company. So announcing future price increases on specific routes and observing competitors' reactions. Or the Gary Dinner's case. So you invite people, you make a discourse, and suddenly they get a privileged information on the future of your pricing strategy. So you cannot do that, and it makes me think about in the early 20th century, information has always been key, and one way to beat the market was to actually go to Europe, take the boat back, and send pigeons. So if you were on a boat not too far from New York, and a pigeon could actually fly from your boat to New York, you would send actually a pigeon from your boat, from where you are on the Atlantic Ocean. It would go actually to its home town in not too far from New York. at that time your servant would grab the pigeon, take the little bit of paper that you would attach to the pigeon with the stock orders. So buy this, sell that, with the privileged information you would get from Europe, actually going back to New York City. So information is key, and disclosing information is okay, but can also be wrong in many instances. So talking about privileged information. So the container shipping case as well, and I know time is running. So when we talk about, So when we talk about machine learning techniques and signaling through artificial intelligence, so we're starting to see papers on artificial transparency. So question of the black box of algorithms. And it's not new. I mean, it's something. A great actually paper by Salcedo 2015, but it's an old story. It's almost since the beginning of AI actually. So and the beginning of one technique in AI, which is neural networks, going back to Frank Rosenblatt. So the principles actually, in a sense, it's clear. But it relies on high parameters and stuff actually that the algorithm will discover, making mathematical sense about it, but maybe not human sense about it. So and that's a black box issue. Also, the weak signal, and that's something we are in particular interested in with Frédéric, and I'm going to in our little model, I'm going to talk about that. So. And I realize time goes by very quickly. So the structure of our paper is about algorithmic collusion through price signaling, the question of unilateral offers of collusive contracts. A little bit about I will spend actually a little more time on the theoretical model and where it leaves us in terms of results. And Frédéric will piggyback on that. So about all these machine learning techniques, how can we use machine learning techniques and create signals to explicitly coordinate or tacitly coordinate? So those are the questions in the literature. Is artificial intelligence a communication device, for instance? So it's important to have actually jurisprudence about that. So that's basically the essence of this slide. Up. So we need to separate actually. So as I said, I mean, we need to separate explicit signaling with tacit signaling. So when we talk about collusion, can we define tacit collusion? I mean, is tacit collusion a concept we can consider? So, and tacit collusion, so you see the quote actually from the US Supreme Court here. So tacit collusion, sometimes called oligopolistic price coordination or conscious parallelism, describes a process not in itself unlawful, and that's what interesting, by which firms in a concentrated market might in effect share monopoly power, setting their prices at a profit-maximizing, supra-competitive level by recognizing their shared economic interest and their interdependence with respect to price and output decisions. So that's an interesting concept and a critical concept actually for us in AI, because I can, and I will show you that in the model, I can actually devise an algorithm that will, in a very innocent way, in a very candid way, will decide my pricing policy. But my competitors and my, in a way, co-competitors may actually read, may know this algorithm and may read the signals as weak signals and collude tacitly with my pricing strategy. And obviously, this would be an issue for competition. So in the early case of air traffic publishing company, I mean, the price signals were complex, but were accompanied by explanatory notes. With algorithms, you can imagine actually a chaos filtered by these algorithms. And even algorithms, and that's the segue to our model, even algorithms actually can filter and can create actually chaos, but a chaos that they will be able to understand, and that my company, will be able to read these weak signals, and we will be able to coordinate in a tacit way. So that will be the essence of our model. In terms of game theory, so you have this, and what I'm saying, so using game theoretical words, actually, in terms of game theory, what you have is a Stackelberg leader that will make a unilateral announcement, imposing its price, testing the acceptance of its competitors. It can be a unique signal. It can be based on multiple iterations. And again, we can, since we talk about algorithms, we can code whatever strategy is actually adequate in the context we are. So suddenly we have an incredible, AI, I was praising the new technologies at the beginning. So we can do a lot of incredible stuff, but like any new technology, we can also use these technologies to our own benefit, to the expense of others, and that's where it's actually an issue. So that's an incredible power for the good, but it's also an incredible power for the bad, even if what you want to do is not actually work at the expense of others, but work for yourself and get actually an incredible power. So there is an amazing paper by Stephen Salop about the noisy monopolist. And I rediscovered, it's a paper you read during your PhD, and I rediscovered actually this paper in the early 2000s. So in 2004, which is at the time of the modems. So in 2004, I was actually, and that's okay. When I'm in a way, actually, I got all excited about that. So a student of mine enters into my office and says, "Okay, it would be great actually to scrap websites." And I was, it would be great. Not sure it's legal, but it would be great to do that. And I was thinking, okay, so let's scrap a website which was called pricegrabber.com. And in a very short time here, PriceGrabber was a price aggregator. So as someone working in industrial organization and thinking about competition policy, you think, okay, wow, this is pure and perfect competition very soon coming up. Because if you aggregate prices, price equals marginal cost at the end of the day, because a consumer with zero search cost on the internet, okay, will be able to sort out which product, which price, what is the best price for the same product I should order to this company instead of that one. Okay, so that's pricegrabber.com. Makes the difference with, I was mentioning Amazon before, makes the difference with the Amazon case. Because it's a different system. Amazon with a buy box, Frédéric will talk about that. So it's a different system. Here, pricegrabber.com was giving me for free the perfect information. So that's just amazing, and it's 2004. What's very interesting about so this time, 2004, we scrapped 30,000 different products for a period of 6 months. And you can imagine I'm talking about my computer in 2004. So 30,000 different products, all the prices, twice a day. So it was a great data set. And what you realize is that you don't go to price equals marginal cost. In fact, the noisy monopolist paper was a theoretical paper. And in 2004, we were able, empirically speaking, to get the data proving that Stephen Salop was right in theory. Because what we saw in this paper is a menu cost. That, yes, technology would allow me as a consumer to have the information, the perfect information on the best price for the same product, the quality I was requiring as a consumer. But companies had also, thanks to this technology, a way, the menu cost was very little, a way to change the price whenever they wanted. So think about it. I mean, it's just amazing because suddenly what you get is, yes, I'm not going to get the monopolistic price as a company because of price grabber, because of the free sharing of this information on prices. But the second best is to have the oligopolistic profit. So if I create noise, and this is what companies would do and it was possible because menu cost was very low, so they could change prices very quickly, instantly, every minute if they wanted. So if you suddenly create a wave of random prices for the same product, sometimes you would get actually the consumer at a price greater than the marginal cost. So you would fish actually for someone with no abilities in terms of search cost, or someone who was in a rush to get the product, and all the other explanations you can imagine of. So search cost and menu cost. And that's the beginning of the 2000s. And you realize actually that in terms of competition policy, it matters a lot. So that's basically what you see on this slide. The consumers who are more efficient information gatherers and searchers obtain better buys on average. So that's when we started with our model. But what we do, and I know I'm long actually with this example, but what we do, so it's a profit function. I mean, it's nothing complicated here. So it's a probability to get the right price through the search cost. So it's just a probability and a profit function that I put on these slides. But and you see the profit and the search cost actually for every for the noisy monopolist. That's the optimization program for the noisy monopolist. And what's interesting, with this story, with this context, is that with AI nowadays, it's even even more powerful actually for companies. So in the early 2000s, it's a matter of sharing the information, search cost, and it's a matter of menu cost on the supply side. Okay, nothing wrong. But it's a noisy monopolist anyway, okay? So, and when I hear monopolist, I mean, there's something tinkling about it. So, but here, suddenly with AI, and with the search costs and so on, and with what we define as an algorithmic noisy monopolist, suddenly you can sort really quickly. So, and you can call that data-driven marketing, whatever, so Google Ads, I mean, and so on. Suddenly you can really quickly sort out consumers in different groups, so you can price discriminate perfectly and get actually the maximum reservation price per consumer. So maybe it's okay, and because consumers are ready to pay anyway, that's their reservation price. Maybe it's okay. Now we need to pay attention to that anyway. But now it shows anyway actually the power of AI in terms of menu cost, in terms of being able to offer the right menu for you, the company, the algorithmic noisy monopolist, to the consumer. And it shows also something else is if I can price discriminate, I'm also sending signals. I mean, other companies will know actually which algorithms I'm using. And I can send actually, it sends by default actually. I send my menu to my competitors. And they can align actually suddenly with that. And they can even going beyond, and that would be tacit collusion. And going even beyond, so that's what we mentioned here actually, with utilizing dispersion as a sorting device to separate customers into multiple submarkets to permit this price discrimination. So it's knowledge we can share very easily because it's very easy to share an algorithm. But at the same time, it goes beyond even tacit collusion because we don't even have to collude, but we play the algorithmic noisy monopolist game. And sometimes it's my market, sometimes it's your market, sometimes it's my market, sometimes it's your market. which raises actually questions about coordination, if you see what I mean. So, those are actually the new challenges to competition policies. And maybe I will conclude actually here. I don't want to go over for too long, but that's the essence of our research project with Frédéric. So, and how intellectually we have evolved actually with our different backgrounds, and came up actually to this research project, and why we think it's very important to address all these questions about what has been accepted as tacit collusion, what is algorithmic tacit collusion nowadays, and that there is maybe something beyond even tacit collusion, that we may not even, the weak signals can be used by algorithms without, and again, I mean, without bad intent maybe at the beginning, but big profits at the end, with a situation that's the winner takes all, and you become a keystone player, and you have your ecosystem, and you are in a dominant position with no or with a lower level of contestability on your market. So that's what the technology is doing sometimes already, that we can observe. That's what the technology can do. And the more we are heading in this direction, and we will talk about that a little later, but the more value you have, I mean, the more you develop yourself as a digital native, the more value you have, and the more market power you have. I'm just referring here, for instance, to the data network effects. So do I still have a couple of 1 minute maybe to conclude on the data network effects? Yes. So, for instance, and that's an example I give actually very, very often, and Frédéric is sick about it now, so bear with me one more time. So the data network effects, it's defined in many ways in the literature, but practically speaking, from a business perspective, just in this dimension of the definition, you are a big company, Google, Amazon, Tencent, Alibaba. So you are a big company, and you already have an incredible pool of data. What you want when you buy a startup, so startups will be your innovation lab. So you look at startups, you do your own R&D, but you also look at the wisdom of crowds. You look at a ton of startups around you, developing machine learning based algorithms to tackle one issue, a human issue. I mean, businesses will provide solutions. So you're looking at that, and they develop that, and they test that, they train their models on a certain data set in their local communities. And maybe you don't have this data. So when you buy, actually, so if you think it's an interesting machine learning technique, you will actually buy this startup, you will integrate it, you will capture the data by buying that, and by adding all these data sets, suddenly with your own data sets, suddenly, I mean, you are in an exponential growth in terms of information. You have information that anybody else has. So you create, I mean, it's like becoming an informational monopoly in a way. So and it's competitive, I mean, still, but again, as I said before, and I'm going to conclude on that, we need to think about the future. So if we are at the beginning of a winners take all system, maybe we need to rebalance our technological industries. Maybe we need to also adjust again the competition policies. Maybe they are not. Maybe the old principles need to be tweaked a little bit to have a more fair and healthier new technological environment. And technology, we use the word technology now, but in 10 years from now, everything will be technological. So AI will be everywhere. So that's a word that will, to me, actually will disappear, because everything will be based on technology. Well, thank you. Sorry for being too long and too quick, maybe.
Thank you, Professor. It was a great pleasure to hear you. And at this time, I want to thank you, thank to all our audience, and we'll give you some warmest welcome to our webinar. In the name of ADEPAR, Association of Law and Economics of Paraná, Brazil, and the Pontifical Catholic University of Paraná, we would like to welcome all our friends and all the audience that will present at this event. As the actual president director of the ADEPAR, I would like to thank to Professor Eduardo Agostinho, former president director of ADEPAR, for the support and for enabling the partnership between ADEPAR and Pontifical University Catholic. Professor Bruno Guandalini, we thank you for taking the necessary steps to make this webinar happen. Professor Vinicius Klein, for honoring us with your accepting our invitation. All our colleagues at the board, to the membership at the partners of ADEPAR. First, we want to announce that the Professor Alexandre Cordeiro will not be able to participate due to last-minute professional commitments. We want to thank him, to Professor Alexandre, for your accepting our invitation. We just hear Professor Thierry Warin, he presents his paper and his experience like faculty associate MOC network at the Institute for Strategy and Competitiveness at Harvard Business School, founder and director of the Schema Global Lab in Augmented Intelligence. Thank you, Professor. Now we want to present Professor Frédéric Marty, which is CNRS Fellow and Affiliate Researcher to the French Economic Observatory, OFCE, to the International Center for Competition Law and Economics, and member of EPPP Chair, Paris-Sorbonne Business School, and researcher at Cyrano, Montreal. Professor Frédéric, it's our pleasure to meet you, and you have the stage for the 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, President. I will share my screen. Just 1 minute. Sorry. I have to find my the proper, yes, here. Perfect. Excellent. I think you can see the slides. So it is a great honor for Thierry and me to participate to this seminar. Thierry has presented one of our models in order to tackle the issue of algorithmic collusion. I will make a more global presentation about the issue of algorithmic collusion, and I will try to go on our model of signal. But I will try to make a bridge between the field of competition law, my classical, my conventional field, and the one of financial market regulation. Why? Just because we have more and more, increasingly, some similar issue. So, what about the purpose? As Thierry has shown us, we have a lot of paper on algorithmic-based collusion. I will present this different model, mainly based on Ezraki and Stuck's work, but I will make a focus on signaling models. That is to say, how to use algorithmic price signals to achieve collusive equilibria. And we have a paradox. On financial markets, we can use high-frequency orders in order to mislead competitors. That is to say, to create a noise in order to manipulate people, not people, other investors. So it is a logic of dark nudges, a logic of sludges. In the field of competition law, our purpose is to use price movement or to use transparency, in fact, as signaling a willingness to collude, a willingness to identify a focal point for coordination. So it is not a matter of dark nudges, but a matter of nudges. But not nudges for the good, and nudges for the bad. That is to say, the purpose is to infringe competition law. So we have a double issues. For oligopolists, the problem at stake is to decipher their competitor algorithm and to identify weak price signals despite the noise. And for antitrust enforcers, we have to identify collusive patterns on markets and to search for these weak signals that we can characterize as collusion facilitating practices. So the context was already described by Thierry. We have a burgeoning literature in the field of industrial organization, in the field of data science, in the field of legal researches about all the problems, all the issues induced by algorithmic pricing, collusion, price discriminations, and so on. In the same time, if we go back 20 years ago, the promises was exactly the opposite. Thierry already mentioned that point. It was a promise of lower prices, a convergence of the prices towards the marginal cost, and a promise of transparency. We have exactly the opposite. But there is a contradiction. We can not have, in the same time, both the chaos of prices and collusive patterns. In fact, it is a chaos for consumer. It is perhaps a chaos for antitrust enforcers, but perhaps not for oligopolists. And if you consider a contribution of Ariel Esraki and Maurice de Stuck to a report of the OECD in 2017, they demonstrated that we can have both price instability, price proliferations, price opacity, and collusive patterns. So, in the global literature on this topic, we have a lot of issues, a lot of concerns about the plausibility of such agreements. Thierry already mentions some works on this point. And we have also a second issue in the field of antitrust enforcement, in which we wonder how capacity to detect and to sanction such collusive strategies. That is to say, to implement a real deterrence against criminals, white-collar criminals, but criminals. So what will be our purpose in this presentation? First, to present the whole picture, the whole scope of algorithmic-based collusion, and to put the accent on a specific scenario, that is to say, the messenger, the signaling algorithm. That is to say, how to produce collusion through price signals, playing as unilateral communication on one hand. It was the case in the 1920, no, not 1920, 1910 of the Gary's dinners, sanctioned by the US Supreme Court in 1920. So I speak about the future of price. I speak about my future policy unilaterally without any exchange, direct exchange of information, or I can create the collusion by creating an artificial transparency. So the structure, a first section to present the whole picture, four following section in order to present the four possibility to collude through algorithm. The case of using the algorithm in order to implement the police of the cartel, the possibility to implement a price coordination through parallel algorithm, our main purpose using signaling algorithm as an invitation to collude. Finally, the first scenario, that is to say the bot-led collusion, that is to say letting the algorithm to collude themselves. And I will try to finish by some concluding remarks. Among these four scenarios, the most interesting, the most striking is certainly the last one. That is to say, through artificial intelligence, through machine learning, algorithm can be able to collude themselves without any restriction, without any intention, and can succeed in this enterprise without any exchange of information. This scenario appears like something not so realistic. There were a lot of literature which was very pessimistic about this scenario. I took only two examples on the slide. First, a paper from one of my friend, Thibaut Schreppel, from the University of Utrecht in Netherlands. Thibaut called this scenario a legal sci-fi. Worst, even worst, in the field of economics, Agraval, Gans, and Goldfrapp in 2018, algorithmic collusion is only an economist catnip. What's an economist catnip? It is something interesting, but unlikely to be first of importance. But in fact, this algorithmic collusion, as Thierry previously stated, is not purely a sci-fi. Why? Just because algorithm can help us to overcome the traditional pitfalls of oligopolistic collusion. These pitfalls, this limitation, was clearly established by George Stigler, in the 60s. But what was the main difficulty to implement such collusion? First, the difficulty to observe price. Thierry spoke about web scraping 20 years ago. Today, it is very easy to scrap pricing on the web. Just an example. We had a decision in the European Commission 2 years ago about hi-fi equipment sellers like Pioneer, Asus, Denon & Marantz, Philips, and so on. These cartelists, in fact, just use spiders. That is to say, they monitor constantly the price online and they adjust automatically the price. That is to say, first, you can observe any deviation and you can engage retaliation instantaneously without any human intervention. That is to say, if I am a cartelist, I have no incentive to cheat. I have no incentive to deviate, just because I will not have any profit resulting from my deviation. But there is still a difficulty. Can we obtain such a result without any communication? Here, it is all the problem. Just because if we have no communication, we have a significant risk, again, sorry, to have a false positive decision. That is to say, considering that there is no infringement on competition law, just because we do not find the smoking gun, the facilitating practice that help us to characterize such strategy. But in fact, we can find some types of communication through weak signals, unilateral announcement, and artificial transparency. So, how to collude in such oligopolistic situation? In fact, we have to identify a focal point. How to do in the real life? It is a trial and error process. It will spend many time. It will be efficient if all the players are homogeneous. Very difficult to implement if we are too numerous, too heterogeneous, and so on. How to do? To use a barometric firm, that is to say a firm that everybody will follow because this undertaking will act in the whole interest of all the market players. Second solution, one firm plays as a Stackelberg leader and propose a price in its own interest or in the interest of the whole segment. So, if I am a Stackelberg leader, and if I announce my future price, it is something like an invitation to collude. And if we consider not Richard Posner as a law and economy specialist, but like a practitioner, like a judge, and if we read its judgment in the case fructose corn syrup in 22, we have the best definition that I know of tacit collusion through unilateral commitment. Richard Posner say, okay, an invitation to collude, a signal about my future price is something like a unilateral contract offered to competitors to collude. Sometimes we have just one step, as Thierry previously said. Sometimes we have some rounds. Thierry quoted a US case, Air Tariff Publishing Co. in 1994. We can have another case, container shipping in the European Union in 2016. This morning, I read some Brazilian jurisprudence, and I found another Air Tariff Publishing Co. case. I think it was adjudicated by the CADE in 22, I think, but I'm not sure, very sure. And it was exactly the same story than the US case. The algorithm, the website, disseminating information concerning planned or contemplated fares, but with a 3-day notice. So it was very something special in the algorithm, is that your competitor can read the announcement, but not your consumers, not the travel agency, not the individual customers. And if I am the Stackelberg leader, I have just to observe during this window of 3 days what will be the reaction of my competitors. Do my competitors increase their prices? If yes, I maintain my price. If no, I renounce to increase my price. So it is exactly the same topic in terms of round of negotiation. So here it is not an artificial intelligence-based algorithm. So we can wonder to what extent algorithm, AI algorithm especially, can be something like a game changer that can make tacit collusion more probable and easier to maintain. How, in fact, algorithm can produce, and it was, in fact, the our main point and the main reason for why we want to compare competition law to financial regulation, how to produce weak signals as, again, sorry for my English accent, healthy facilitation practices. That is to say, a price playing as an invitation to collude, but hidden in a proliferation of price, hidden by the volatility, the instability of price signals. That is to say, me and you, we have no chance to catch this signal, but perhaps another algorithm operated by your competitor can very easily detect this signal, this very fugitive signal. So we will spend a lot of time on this model of signals, but I will present very quickly all the different scenarios of collusion. So the first scenario, Thierry already mentioned it, is the police of the cartel. In fact, when I make collusion, when I make a cartel, especially tacit collusion, it is very easy and it is very profitable sometimes to deviate. That is to say, to not respect my implicit commitment to cooperate. So what can be the role of an algorithm is a role of moral hazard reducer. That is to say, through its God view, it can detect any deviation and engage immediately retaliation. We have a lot of cases in which we can find this type of use of algorithm. There were two reports, for instance, the one of the European Commission, a sector-specific inquiry 3 years ago about e-commerce in Europe, testifying that not all, but a large part of market players use this type of spider. And we have more recently in the state, the George Stigler Center report in Chicago, concluding in the same vein. But we have something very important to underline. Using spider, monitoring prices is not anti-competitive in itself. If I am a competitor, I can react in an intelligent way to market signal. I have all the incentive to observe market signals. So observing price is not a facilitating practice in itself. Second point, sorry, I will speak in French, very easy. So second point, these tools can be also used by competition authority. We can observe price patterns and say to the firms, you have to explain your prices. So we will see this, in conclusion, but it is something like a Janusian nature, and not just a facilitating practice. Second point, using code in order to collude through parallel algorithm. Again, a lot of examples in the case law. The best case, just because we have a smoking gun, exactly the same algorithm, is the Topkins case in the state 5 years ago. But we can do things in a more safer way. We can use the same algorithm than our competitors. We can use the same algorithm developer than our competitors. If there is no Chinese walls between users, if the algorithm is trained on the same set of data, and if the set of data are mixed from one player to another one, the algorithm will react in the same vein. So you can appoint an IT firm to develop an algorithm for all competitors. I think it is a case in Brazil with a driving school in this type of practice, but it's just a lecture, I am not sure. but you can use the same technology to obtain the same result. There is a second way to implement collusion through parallel algorithm. It is the case of hub and spoke conspiracies. That is to say, you have something like a central office that concentrate information and disseminate after this information. If the information disseminated its future price and so on, it will be exactly the same thing of communication among competitors, but here not direct communication, but bottom top communication and top down communication. Perhaps a platform, an intermediary platform, can play this role. If I am a monopolist, I do not know, for car drivers, for instance, and if I centralize all the prices, all the capacity available in a given city, I can define the price and allocate market. It is perfect for a cartel. Deciding from a unique price without any capacity to deviate and to share markets, to share contracts among cartelists. There were some cases in this situation. The case of the procedure opened in the state against Uber, a class action, Meyer versus Kalanick, 4 years ago. I have read also that you had a similar case in Brazil, in which some concern have been raised about the risk that the algorithm of Uber may annihilate any competition among drivers. And we have some opinion in Europe among advocate general, that is to say in the Court of Justice of the European Union, saying in some situation, a platform can act like I do not know, statistic office animated a cartel. We have in Europe another case, very funny case, the case Eturas. Eturas is a global distribution system for travel agency in Lithuania, and not on the whole Lithuania, but on a little part of Lithuania. And in Eturas, all the travel agencies used the same algorithm. And this algorithm was very special. You are free from your price. You can grant rebate, but as soon as your rebate exceeds a threshold of 3%, you receive an email. It is something like a nudge. Hello, you risk to destabilize the cartel. So it is a way to collude through awareness. And we will see, we can discuss. In terms of competition law, it is very difficult to say, okay, I have the signal, but I ignore the signal. Because you cannot express a disagreement. You cannot write back to reply to the email saying, I do not take in consideration this signal. And the risk is that a machine learning algorithm may make this type of behavior more and more probable. Why? It's just a model of iterated prisoner dilemma. And see, for instance, the work of Axel Ward in 1984, you have a possibility of cooperation at the benefit of the cartelist. But the most important point, I am very, very late in my presentation, sorry. In fact, we have a leader who proposes a price, a future price. See, for instance, in the case of Air Tariff Publishing Co., not the Brazilian one, but the US one, the paper from Borenstein in 23. In fact, it is a way to test, to make a trial and error process without any cost, because we discuss about future prices and not present prices, not current prices. So in fact, the test is not costly, and the test can be very quick to implement. And in fact, if we go on in terms of game theory, it is exactly a non-cooperative game. See, for instance, Kaplov in 2011. It is a super game, in fact. We have indefinitely repeated interaction, and we have a multiplicity of equilibria possible. But what is machine learning? What is artificial intelligence? Is a mean to select one equilibrium among an infinity of equilibria. How to select? 2 ways, 3 ways, in fact. No communication, just let's play the hazard. Bilateral communication or unilateral communication. And we have a very old paper from Cooper and its co-author saying that in a coordination game, the most favorable result is not without communication, is not with a bilateral communication, is through an unilateral, again, sorry for my English, communication. Why? A unilateral announcement is a credible commitment. See, for instance, Friedman in the early 70s, the act is a message. See, in the field of game theory with Schelling in 1960, talk can be cheap, but moves are not. That is to say, if you take the risk, if you take the commitment, it is a credible commitment, just because you can be sanctioned. But here, it is only a way to communicate on future trace. If we take the case of the PhD of Bruno Salcedo that Thierry quoted previously, Salcedo modelized a game in which there is no communication, but a transparency, and unilateral transparency. The Stackelberg leader open periodically its algorithm to its competitors. That is to say, he make his algorithm, decipherable. So if you consider a quote from Michel Gall, very recent, last May, Michel said, by enabling other algorithms to read their minds, either directly by exposing their algorithm even before any action was taken by them, or indirectly through the understanding of actions and reactions, we can limit the need for direct communication and physical meetings among competitors. So you see, you can create this kind of transparency. And it is our main point, the parallel with financial market. In high trading practices, high frequency trading practices, we have some scintillating, again, sorry for my English, order. We have a case in France, analyzed by the French Financial Markets Authority, the JETCO case, in 2016. It was a market manipulation, but an involuntary market manipulation. Why? The algorithm doesn't function very well. That is to say, you have some orders immediately cancelled. It can be a market manipulation. It can be an order anticipation. It can be a momentum ignition. That is to say, you create false signals in order to observe the capacity, the liquidity of your counterparts, in order to alter the expectations of your counterparts and to exploit your advantage. In fact, in that case, it was a technical mistake, but the effect on the market was exactly the use of a weak signal produced involuntarily to to mislead your competitors. But in our cases of cartels, we can have voluntary weak signals. See, for instance, a quote from Louis Kaplov 9 years ago. I will read the quote with my horrible English, my deplorable English. Suppose that a consulting firm creates and sells to all the firms in a given industry a detailed signaling system using, say, the 15th and the 16th decimal place of price announcement or of the number of milliseconds that elapsed between electronic transmission dollars and cents, reconstructing all forbidden magic words or anything else that may prove useful. That is to say, you can use something like a cryptology, like something like an Enigma machine in order to communicate with your partner. So what is the main issue? An issue in terms of enforcement. Competition authority have to monitor this kind of patterns to detect this kind of weak signals, and they can use financial market-based regulatory tools, for instance, or to analyze the code. And I think that in a few minutes, Vinicius Klein will speak about this point in his presentation. So to present the last type of collusion, it is here the legal sci-fi, if I can say that. That is to say, the machine learning and the bot-initiated collusion. The first intuition, the first insight was presented by Ariel Esraki and Maurice Stuck in 2015 in a working paper, I think. And it was challenged by literature, for instance, by Itu and Petit 3 years ago. And if we consider the work of Calvano and his co-authors last year, they demonstrate through Q-learning algorithm and numerical simulation that we can obtain that type of equilibria, and such an equilibrium can be stable. That is to say, if you have a perturbation, if you have something like discrepancies in prices, the algorithm can go back spontaneously, not immediately, but in a reasonable space of time to equilibrium. And here, again, if we take the case of game theory with a paper from Inkstone and Kendall, a paper from Agraval, and so on, it is exactly an issue in terms of evolutionary games, and we can demonstrate, it is the field of Thierry, that machine learning can lead to better results than tit-for-tat procedures. That is to say, to achieve an equilibrium more even quicker. So again, some issues in terms of enforcement, how to characterize the infringement to competition law. So we can reverse the burden of proof. It is the first solution proposed, for instance, in Europe by the report written by Jacques Kremer, Yves-Alexandre de Montjoie, et Heike Schweitzer. They say, okay, the algorithm is a black box. We cannot understand its functioning. But the enterprise that has developed the algorithm, that used the algorithm, can be considered as responsible of its algorithm. And we can find this in all the US jurisprudence. The case of the city of Tuscaloosa in 1990, where the judge say, showing that the defendant acted contrary to its legitimate economic self-interest is sufficient to satisfy the requirement that the plaintiff chose a plus factor beyond mere consciously parallel action. That is to say, if the decision of your algorithm doesn't make sense at the economic point of view, you have to answer. We can also consider that machine learning algorithms are too prone to collude to be authorized. But in that case, we counteract a risk of collusion, but we have a huge loss in terms of efficiency. So, what could be the tool that we can use? Perhaps an ex ante validation of algorithm. A case in France for the authority of regulation of games, of gambling. We test, for instance, for poker, the generator of random numbers in order to see if there is no manipulation against the interest of user. And we can also use algorithmic collusion incubators as proposed by Esquerki and Stuck. So my very, very last slide, and I will stop immediately. We have a lot of perspective of avenue to cope with this difficulty. The first one can be to implement a responsibility standard. That is to say, to make something like a learned hand formula and to apply a negligence rule. That is to say, you have to test your algorithm, you have to assess the risk before distributing your algorithm in the industry. Second solution, to abandon the object. The intention of a machine learning algorithm is impossible to characterize, so you have just to abandon the object as a way to qualify, to characterize a practice as anti-competitive and just observe the results on the market. In financial regulation, it is proposed, for instance, by Tilenchuk in one of its last paper. Or we have also to consider the risk of some decisions, some remedies in antitrust. For instance, some remedies that we can impose for taking unilateral practice issues can be negative in terms of coordinated practice. For instance, if we have an unilateral practice, how to reduce the capacity of a monopolist to exploit its dominant position is to increase transparency. But if we increase transparency, it maximizes the risk of collusion. And if you want to tackle the winner-takes-all phenomenon that Thierry had characterized, we can say, okay, data must be considered as essential facility. Algorithm has to be considered as essential facility. But here, if all the algorithms are equivalent and if all the algorithms are trained on the same data set, the spontaneous result can be a tacit collusion without any need to communicate. So again, sorry for my English and sorry for my incapacity to manage properly the time constraint, and I leave the floor.
Thank you, Professor Marty. Thanks again, Professor Warin. You both was clear and precise. Thank you for that. Now I want to present Professor Vinicius Klein. He is a professor of law and economics at Paraná Federal University. He is a Paraná State's Attorney, PhD in law and economics, former president, director of ADEPAR. Professor Klein, you have the stage for 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks a lot for the honor to speak in this webinar. It's a very huge task for me to speak after two wonderful presentations, very dense presentations that showed a lot of important things about this feature of collusion in algorithmic pricing. And it's an honor and a challenge to speak after Professor Frédéric Marty and Professor Thierry. My main task here, I think, is to try to discuss a little bit of what Professor Thierry and Professor Frédéric Marty have proposed. And for that, I will try to focus more on issues that concern policy issues, not so theoretical ones, and not so dense ones, maybe. And maybe I will repeat something that Professor Thierry and Professor Marty have already spoken, but I'll try to be quick and focus on the discussion and what I can maybe add to the webinar. The first thing I want to say is that this is a very interesting topic because it's lots of paradox. If you remember, the Chicago Antitrust School started with the book by Robert Bork, Antitrust, a Paradox with Itself. And I think we have lots of paradox now because, like, information, it's the main issue here, and information. Some years ago, we are thinking that if you have transparency and information available for all, we could have more competitive pricing, and it would be easier to have a more diversity market. But the present has showed us that it's not this. It happened the opposite. Maybe you have less diversity now, and it's harder to deal with this issue of information. Also, it's an interesting paradox to think about transparency that had been shown in the past presentations in a very good way. And transparency, it's always good in the law. It's always in the law perspective. We always think as transparency as a good feature of anything like government and contracts and things like that. But transparency can lead to this problem of facilitating collusion. Another paradox, I think, is you are having the cartel and the collusion are becoming stable, and you always thought of that as unstable agreements. So this issue is very important. Has a lot of paradox. Maybe it's a way of restarting, reshaping competition law. So my objective here is to show that the emergence of algorithmic competition in antitrust law has posed a lot of problems, a lot of challenges, and maybe the actual antitrust toolkit, the tools we have for facing this the collusion, are out of date now and need a change. So the first thing is that you have this is a very hard line nowadays, even if you don't take into account the think about algorithmic pricing, the difference between lawful parallelism and illegal collusion, because it's harder sometimes to see if people are just doing a rational pricing behavior and following a Stackelberg leader or something like that, or it's a illegal collusion. The concept of agreement, it's a very law concept. It's a very critical one because it uses these categories to see if there is some factors that characterize the conduct, but maybe it's going to be more problematic now. One of the issues it could be, no, this doesn't need to change antitrust or competition enforcement. We could use the argument that is a regular argument in another discussion that is between consumer welfare standard and the new populism or the hipster antitrust that say, no, this is for regulation. This is for data authorities, not for antitrust or not for competition. But we could also say that we are just protecting. That's the one of the things about the collusion is that it's not legal to have same prices, but it's illegal to have the agreement to have same prices. Then if you don't have the agreement, antitrust doesn't need to do anything, or don't need to do radical changes. But this is a problem, because if algorithm pricing is a competitive advantage, it's going to be even more present in more markets, and maybe antitrust deterrence is going to be very hard, and it's not going to be good. One of the things is that, yes, Professors Thierry and Professor Marty have already spoken. We could try more radical changes, like we could try to make a more huge liability for competition, for antitrust. Maybe you could do a very radical turn and try to say that algorithm pricing is illegal, or it's a plus factor that proves the intent of colluding, or it's a proxy for the agreement, or something like that. And you could say that the firm has to build and code restraints to fight collusion, even if we have and these scenarios have already been spoken by Professor Thierry and Professor Marty. The four scenarios, maybe if having the third and the fourth scenario, even that way, when the collusion is produced by machine learning, you could say that it's illegal. We can have and this is gonna come back later. I think it's a better way. It's not so radical to have a compliance program that goes step by step to try to produce guidelines, soft law. I think that's more adequate to competition law and antitrust authorities to try to gain information and a more reflexive regulation to try to build some restraints, maybe not the best restraints that are not gonna be 100% to avoid collusion, but it's gonna help to avoid collusion. And with time and with help from that protection authorities, this thing can become better and can avoid this collusion in lots of markets. But this is the four scenarios. I don't need to spoke again. It's the messenger. The first scenario when humans have the intent to collude, and they use a price algorithm to facilitate their collusion as a messenger. The hub and spoke when there is a common intermediary, and the Professor Frédéric Marty has showed in a very precise way that this could be not just the algorithm, could be like a platform or another third party that intermediates this price fixing, this collusion. And the third and the fourth scenario that are harder includes more machine learning, when you have the idea of tacit collusion on steroids, when the program of the price algorithm allows the collusion, and this is a likely outcome. And the fourth scenario, intelligence and digital AI, the God view that Professor Frédéric Marty has spoken, shows that it's rational to, and it's a profit maximizing pricing politics to follow the leader to do collusion. And this scenario's definition of agreement is problematic because you don't have the intent of the person that developed the algorithm very clearly, showing that he wanted collusion. And there is a phrase in the virtual competition book, very interesting, I think a very interesting quote that says that if you try to say that spite of the absence of agreement, collusion would be illegal. You're not just asking the firms how if that they have to compete. You are defining the intensity of the competition, because you're saying you have to compete, you can't collude, but also have to be very aggressive in the competition. You have to always promote a war of prices, and this is maybe a step too far away for competition policy. Nowadays, the economic foundations that were laid by Professor Stigler very early ago are shaken in the algorithm pricing landscape. This way of using as a plus factor, then when you see the pricing that is very similar, but you don't have any smoking gun, any proof of intent, and use, they are using algorithmic pricing. So this is a plus factor, and you can name that as illegal. This is problematic since algorithm pricing and algorithms are maybe are good, they have some welfare positive effects, and maybe they foster innovation. So it's hard. The other way of promoting like a good a good algorithm that spies for antitrust enforcement, the comportment, the way that the other firms behave, has some problems. The use of consumer algorithm also has some problems. Not all the markets these algorithms are available. So this is not a very easy problem to solve. And then if you go back to the law and say, let's change the law and abolish the concept of agreement and just punish every time there is parallelism, this is very hard. This is another huge step for antitrust, for competition law, because in this way, all parallelism is illegal. So coming back to the thing I said, in this way, we're gonna ask not for the firms just to compete, but we are defining the intensity of the competition. And this is a very huge intervention from the state in economics. Maybe antitrust nowadays is missing some tools to deal with this. And one way of reducing the challenges is giving to someone else, and this can maybe the data regulation, supervisor task, but maybe there's not enough in Brazil. There is not an effective data regulation agency working. Now there is the law, but the data regulation agency is not working now. And if you think about the only the exposed perspective, this may be not enough, because it go back to the difficulty of defining agreement. And in Brazil, that you can have the condemnation by administrative authorities, and then there is the possibility of judicial review. If you don't use any proof of intent, I think almost all the condemnations are going to be reversed in the judicial court, and then the deterrence effect is going to be null. It's going to be very, very low. So Frédéric Marty, in a very important paper, and I read that paper, and he's saying this is it's a very good paper, shows one thing that I think is not he didn't mention in his presentation, but it's a very important approach. I think that maybe what's missing is go beyond law and economics and use a more technical approach to co-design as a tool. So maybe we don't have like a exact authorization for all the algorithms, but maybe you can start coding and demanding coding in some markets that are more prone to collusion, and this will need a more technical approach. So you're going to have to work with data scientists like Professor Thierry and other person that can, people that can know how to program the software. The risk in that approach is that to reduce innovation, it can happen because if you start to work in coding and you demand restraints, this could lead to unintended effects, and the control environment you could use in a lab is not different from a more rich environment that happens with machine learning in the market. Maybe you can use administrative sanctions and other antitrust remedies to third parties like developers. They also could be problematic with this review, but it's a way. I think in Brazil and other countries, antitrust authorities in this field could profit for a joint force with data protection authorities and people that have more technical skills, not just law and economics, but law and economics and technique in this way, have more experience in coding regulation effects. Sandbox environment is good, but I think with time it comes better, and this is what I think about coding. You have to go step by step in a more precautionary way, doing just one step. Start with markets like air transport markets that are very prone to collusion, and go the next step to see how your regulation is working. Soft law is very important in antitrust, and maybe that's the best tool to use. Of course, you are facing the risk of reducing innovation, but it's a trade-off. Maybe if you don't have no deterrence of antitrust law, maybe it's a price to pay. So one idea is to see the markets and see the burden of proof maybe can change, and if the agent has a compliance pricing algorithm restraint, if he has a program and he can show the competition authority that this program can work to restrain collusion, maybe that's good. That's a way of doing the things. And if they fail to show they tried or to have any measure to avoid cartel formation or collusion, maybe this makes liability more certain. Maybe you don't need to rewrite the code, but to ask firms to show how they try to restrain in step-by-step way, in a more and this can be complemented with compliance program for algorithms, for pricing algorithms that ask for how the transparency is going and how the price coordination are used, and if that's a robust restraint that can help with liability. I think the major changes to evaluate, because of the time and the gap, how this restraints, even if you go step by step, how these things are gonna work, and if they are gonna be effective, or they're gonna be just a black box. So this is a very new challenge, I think, for antitrust, for competition law. And this can change the way competition law works, because if you think about preventive measure, ex-ante regulation, this is very, very different from what we have normally in competition law. But maybe it's the only way, and maybe the risks, if you go step by step, have a good trade-off. That's that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much, and maybe I could try to help the discussion. And after that, I want to hear again Professor Frédéric Marty and Professor Thierry, because they are the experts on the subject. I'm just trying to build some discussion here. Thanks very much.
Thanks to you, Professor Klein, for your lecture. At the same as Professor Marty and Thierry, it was very precise and very clear. Now I would like to present the Professor Eduardo Agostinho, our partner in this event. Professor, you have the stage.
Thank you, Eduardo. I'd like to thank Professor Thierry Warin, Professor Frédéric Marty, and Professor Vinicius Klein. It was amazing, the subject, and we could have a lot of issues to present here, but I think the techniques is the main issue, because we have some researchers in artificial intelligence, and they say that they don't know what is in the black box. so that's a very, very paradox. That is the paradox. I agree with Vinicius. We live another paradox in antitrust. But I'd like only to thank you. It was amazing. I think that's the first step for a long research together. We are very glad to receive you here, and I'd like to thank Bruno Guandalini, that was our associate that introduced you, and I'd like to hear you about the issues that Vinicius bring us, considering the issues that you have presented. So thank you very much. Eduardo?
The mic.
Our mic.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Thank you, Professor Agostinho. I just see in our chat there are 2 questions from Professor Márcia Ribeiro, former president of ADEPAR, and she wrote in French, and I will be my best to read for you, Professor Marty, Warin et Professor Klein. Bonjour. Quand nous avons un algorithme qui peut conduire à une situation de connivence-collusion, comme c'est le cas du Uber, contraire à la loi comme on la connaît, mais qui atteint aux besoins.
Perhaps an answer in English. My English is better, is certainly worse than my French, but I think it will be more understandable. In fact, using a pricing algorithm is not anti-competitive in itself. Just if you are not dominant, if the driver can opt for multi-homing, that is to say, use different intermediary services. If as a user, I have the app of Uber, the app of Lyft, and so on, there is no capacity to monopolize the market and use the algorithm as a device to stabilize the prices and to allocate to share markets. But the game for a platform is to provide incentives to its user to opt for single homing. I will try to make a race to the size in order to provide incentives to customers to use only Uber through, for instance, loyalty devices, loyalty schemes, and to penalize, perhaps, to make retaliations against a driver who do not use Uber constantly. So by these strategies, we are in a competition inter-platforms, that is to say, among platforms. And if you have only one platform in a given city, this platform can act not both as a monopoly and can manipulate prices by imposing discriminatory pricing, for instance, or like a cartel office allocating markets. So in that case, I'm very agree with you. It can be and no bespoke collusion. But if we have some alternatives to use bicycle, to use motorcycles, and so on, it is not a monopoly. So you see, it is a real issue in terms of the definition of relevant market. And again, for providing a European example, the definition of the relevant market used within the EU 27, it is very difficult for me to say 27. I think I will spend the rest of my life thinking 28 and correcting 27. But within the EU 27, the definition of relevant market was defined in 1997, just 23 years. In 1927, I was a student in economics. It is not prehistoric times, it is not the Paleolithic, but it is already another world, just because how to define markets by geography, that is to say the distance, the physical distance, and by product substitutability. What is the main characteristics of platforms, of the hub economy, is to say there is no distance. The distance has mainly disappeared. And how to define the substitutability between two products? In Europe, we had the decision, the Google Android decision in 2018, in which the Commission said, okay, an Android phone and an iOS phone, an iPhone, belongs to two different markets, just because of the switching cost between the two ecosystems and so on. So you see, it is very difficult to characterize with any risk of errors this kind of issues. So again, thanks for writing in French, and sorry to speak in my terrible English, but perhaps Thierry will say some additional points in a far better English from mine.
I thought I was going to answer in French. Well, thank you for the question in French, and congratulations on your French. I wish I had the same level in Portuguese. So, you know, from a technical perspective, and Uber is a great example. So from a technical perspective, and it's related to the winner takes all spirit. It's complicated to create Uber, but it's not that complicated. I mean, so technically speaking, I'm not talking about scaling, but technically speaking, it's a relational database. So you have someone supplying time as a driver, and you have someone demanding time as someone who wants to be driven across town. So think about if you were actually to write an algorithm and to put into these two persons in a relation, it's actually very easy. That's what you learn as a coder when you start coding. You have a demand and you have a supply, and do they match? So it's filtering through a database. So it's very easy. Putting it at scale is a little more complicated. The CTO of Uber would believe I'm totally crazy. I mean, it's insane to have Uber at the world stage. I mean, how many servers, maintenance, and so on. I understand, but just what is interesting for us in competition law, the algorithm that does the matching, that's not that complicated. So the barriers to entry are not actually on that. The barriers to entry are more about the network effects, in fact. So, and that's what these platforms benefit from. So, and that's why I'm always insisting on the winner takes all situation, because if you are the first one in place and you create these network effects, and I also mentioned the data network effects. So if you benefit first from the network effects, you're at scale, and you're at an exponential scale really quickly. And if you're at scale, suddenly you you become in the Harvard school thinking, you become actually the monopolistic power, and your relevant market, and you define the relevant market, as Frédéric mentioned. So to me, actually, it's that's a revolution. It's really so suddenly. In the early 2000s with the digital natives, and Frédéric mentioned actually before and after, and there is really an after. It's a new era in human history, and we need to really realize it. So there is an after, and it's a new beginning. It's year zero. With all this technology we have access to, and quantum computing is going to happen in the next 5, 10, maybe 15 years. And it will also accelerate again all this stuff. So the barriers to entry, we believe the barriers to entry are technical, but we need to go a little beyond. And because the barriers to entry are, to me, actually more about the magnitude and the magic of network effects, which raises actually the fundamental question of, okay, you define what the relevant market is, and you are, as a first mover on this market, you are actually the guy in a monopolistic situation. So it's fundamental, and I don't want to take the mic too long, but it's really fundamental, because think about all your courses in industrial organization, in economics, in microeconomics. It's actually taught and researched, thinking, okay, the goal is pure and perfect competition. So it's an ideal goal. It will never happen. We have frictions on the market because information is asymmetric, but we want to reduce the asymmetries of information. We want to have more transparency on the market. And sometimes we have product differentiation. And it's okay most of the time, because it's about the quality of the product. And sometimes you have price discrimination. And it's okay as long as the company does not benefit from a monopolistic power over the consumer and grab too much of the reservation price from the consumer. And it's okay as long as it's not the same consumer that's targeted by this firm. So we are in the gray zone, if you see what I mean. So, and we have accepted in our competition law actually the gray zone, and we say, so we are going to trigger the alarm when it's too obvious that it's not okay anymore. And how do we do that? So the two big schools, I mean, the Chicago school and the Harvard school, the structuralist and the behavior people. So thinking, if it's contestable, so if it looks like you are taking too much of a market share, but the market is still contestable, that's okay. That's how the European doctrine and the US doctrine has evolved. But now, if it looks like you are taking too much of a market share, and you are a couple of you actually doing that, and we realize it's not contestable, that's actually when we are going to investigate. And Frédéric went through a couple of court decisions on that. But the paradigm has changed with the new technologies. So with the telecommunications, the web, so the computing power, the web, the data-driven marketing, and now AI, which is another revolution on top of this revolution, the technological revolution. And tomorrow, quantum computing, which will be another revolution. We are going so fast, so quick. I mean, it's unbelievable. Deep learning, I mean, everywhere and so on. I mean, using unstructured data. So we are going so fast that all the principles in industrial organization, which have informed competition law in many ways, should be looked with the ideal goal first. I mean, the ideal goal was fair competition. Our capitalist societies rely on fair competition. So will we have actually fair competition? And how do we, and the question is, how do we redefine the proxies to measure fair competition? Is it still market share and contestability, and we put a lot of emphasis on contestability lately. But as we said in our two presentations with Frédéric, and it was also, and I have a question actually for you, Professor Klein. It was also in your presentation. It's with algorithms and data-driven marketing and so on. I mean, the new techniques. Maybe on my, and I don't want to give brands because I like them anyway. I mean, they serve a purpose. But maybe on my Apple TV, I will see the buy movie and I won't see the rent movie, because the algorithm will know I'm actually ready to buy this movie. So why give me the option of renting it when Apple can make more money by just giving me the buy button? And so is it okay? Well, I'm okay as a consumer. I was ready to buy it. But is it okay that Apple makes the decision for me? And I'm not saying Apple does it, but Apple could do it. And we have actually examples in the literature of companies providing filtering hotels choices, hotels options which are at a higher price for Apple users compared to PC Windows users. So if I am an Apple user, I buy a more expensive computer. Hence, the algorithm decides that I should actually see hotel rooms with a higher price more frequently than someone using a PC computer, a Windows-based computer. So is it okay? I mean, yeah, as a consumer, I'm okay with that. I mean, I was ready to pay more anyway. But should I be the one making the decision, or should it be the company making the decision? And again, the issue is even more important if this company is a monopolistic power, has defined the relevant market. And so those are, I mean, you see that it's all the lessons we've learned and the gray area we've accepted in industrial organization informing our competition law currently should be revisited. And what I've heard actually here is to have maybe not a higher. So we've worked actually in competition law with high principles, and since algorithms are granular, very micro oriented to the unity that goes even to a consumer unit. So we will need a way more complex approach actually of competition law, and a way more dynamic approach. So jurisprudence will play an even bigger role actually in the future of competition law. I'm certain, convinced, compared to higher principles as the ones we were looking for actually based on the past approaches in industrial organization. So that would be my comment and what I wanted to stress. Anyway, and Professor Klein, I was interested actually in your slides when you were, and you did it a couple of times. So when you were mentioning the role of the data protection agencies as well, and I would love you to expand a little bit on this issue, because I think it's a very important issue, in fact.
Thank you, Professor Thierry. This thing about data, I agree with you. This thing about high principles, because maybe competition as we knew it doesn't exist anymore, will not exist anymore, because the process, this is, let's try to speak in French, the taux de tenue from Valhas to know the price, maybe it's going to be replaced by algorithm in online, and it's going to be very quick, and the process of trial and error will not happen. So maybe we're not defending competition anymore, because this high principle of competition and a process of discovery, that famous article from Professor Hayek and other things like that, maybe they are for another world. And this would be a very huge change in competition law, I think, and this must lead to new types of jurisprudence. And that's one of the I think one of the funny ways that we can use the consumer welfare standard again from Chicago Institute School, because doesn't matter if you have agreement or doesn't have an agreement, you can harm the consumer welfare the same way. So maybe the Chicago school is going to be, and maybe it's going to come back. I like this historical discussion. I don't want to take another continue discussion with both of you in this thing, in this subject, more historical, because maybe Chicago school is going to be more interventionist than was before, and maybe consumer welfare will lead to different measures and enforcements. But there's and things about the data that's another I think interesting thing, because one example could be the financial markets. Some times ago, people always complain, like in Brazil, that the biggest barrier to entry in financial markets was regulatory, was a license from the government. Nowadays, probably if you have like Amazon or other huge player with big data, doesn't matter if you have the license or not. You don't have the data from the same data as Amazon. You can have a fintech, a very innovative way of doing payments and things like that, but that is going to be the key. And data maybe is just with one or two companies. And like in Brazil, we're discussing using that example of financial markets. You're using that discussion about who is the owner of the data. It's the person, it's the consumer, or it's the company. And you have a regulatory initiative recent that says the consumer is the owner of the data. Is open banking, think about regulation in financial markets. And I could, if that's mine, I could sell or make it available for every company, but maybe I'm gonna need some algorithms or artificial intelligence to do that, to make it available to everyone, to every competitor. Because one thing is the law says the data is yours, you have the data. Another thing is to say you can change it, exchange it, there is no transaction costs or no costs to replace the data and take the data to every financial institution. In your example, that's another high principle, very important principle, the question of options. Because one of way, and this comes back to Hayek and other leading articles that shape the way we see competition as a process of discovery. If the option is taken by someone else, you don't have the option. So it's worth defending competition anymore. I could ask that. And this leads to a huge crisis, I think, in what competition is defending. But one way, I think, is try to use the data as maybe the thing about essential facilities. Professor Frédéric Marty has spoken. And he has spoken of one of the bad things of that approach, that if it's a essential facility, it's open to everyone, and everyone use in the same way. Maybe you can use like a way of the consumer, make it available, and you can use as a different input in different algorithms, I think. But I think it's important to have a joint force, because I don't know in other countries, but I know that in Brazil, there is no experience. I know like in the United States, they created a special task force with more a technical approach, but I don't know, in Brazil, they didn't make that yet. And I think maybe in other countries, there is no institutional experience for dealing with data and protecting data. And I think this year, maybe next year, we're going to start the data agents. There is a law, but the law says the data must be created, the agents must be created in some time and has not yet been put in practice. So, but maybe this way of dealing with coding and with the question maybe is the ownership of the information, maybe can help reshape the enforcement. But just some thoughts, not thanks.
Okay, thanks, professors, for the answers. Now, I see here we have a comment and a question for Professor Micaela Fernandes. She wrote, sometimes there is no necessarily algorithmic collusion, but a business model that depends on the existence of few players, or even one to work well, as in some digital market nets. The economics rationality may justify a certain tolerance in these cases. Sometimes the risk of causing prejudice in other aspects justify the public policy intervention. Professors?
Yes, if I can intervene, it is an excellent point. We have this issue in Europe, both in Germany, France, and the European Union at stake since the beginning of this year. In fact, we are in a situation in which we have some firms that obtain something like a monopoly position, but on their own merits. That is to say, without any abuse of dominance, without any monopolization in the US sense of the term. They reach this position only because of their technology, their data advantage, their network effects, and so on. All the points that Thierry underlined. In fact, in addition, when these companies obtain this monopoly position, they do not abuse from their position. That is to say, they do not increase their prices, they do not reduce the quality of their services, as they continue to innovate. So in fact, if we consider, as the Professor Klein said, only the criterion of the consumer welfare, it is perfect. I have nothing to say. It is something like a perfect Soviet Gosplan. In fact, it is the best use of information in society. Just consider the old article of Hayek in 1945, the use of knowledge in society, opposing the market and the Soviet calculation. Google is something like a success of Soviet calculation. In terms of welfare, nothing to say. But in terms of market process, the market is a process, the competition on the market is a process of discovering new knowledge, new opportunities, and so on. In fact, we lose all these advantages of the market process. In terms of political risk, we can consider that the role of competition is to ensure the dispersal of economic power in the sphere of the market, and the dispersal of economic power is a condition to ensure the dispersal of political power. Just because if we have a concentration of economic power, this economic power will try to protect itself against competition by capturing political power, and in the same time, we will have something like populist movement saying, we have a big business, we need a big government. So there is a problem in terms of competitive process, but we have also a problem in terms of innovation. Next week with Thierry, we will participate to the Ascola conference, and we will speak about this point. If I am a monopoly, I am always incentivized to innovate, but only to maintain my monopoly power, only to capture additional information flow to extract more value. It is not disruption. In addition, we have some concerns in terms of fairness toward trading partners, fairness toward consumers, and so on. And for instance, next week, 2 weeks ago, the European Commission made a proposal of a special framework for platform. And in this proposal, we have the consumer market, the consumer welfare criterion, yes, but several criterion: market process, fairness, and additionally, not competition related and not economic related values, like pluralism in the press, for instance. And you see, in fact, we are not only confronted to an economic issue, but also a political issue in the better sense and the best sense of the word.
If I may chime in, so and piggyback, Frédéric, on what you said about the market and the role of the market. So again, there is a before and an after, which is our present time. So and the after triggered by the convergence of computing power algorithms, data. So our data age, and our capitalist, our societies have been based on capitalism. Why? Because of the coordination mechanism of the market. So you have supply demand. You don't know where it is. You don't know how much, but it will give you. The market will actually coordinate supply and demand, will make a demander becoming a supplier if the price is too high. So it will allocate actually resources in the most efficient way, considering asymmetries of information anyway. So it's not perfect, but the market plays a role of coordination, which a government cannot do in every place and every time. It would take an immense amount of resources to do that. And you mentioned the Ghost Plan. So that was an attempt to do that. So the market, capital, and the market is something, and capitalism is something else. So capitalism is the organization of the society around actually the market principles. So and the market principles, one of them is really the price coordination mechanism. And so allocating resources in a way. So and dispersing information. The price gives me an important information. Should I become a consumer? Should I become a supplier right now when I see this price? So and capitalism has created something based on that, something different, and our democratic societies regulate capitalism also. I mean, to avoid some exaggerations, and one of them is in competition law becoming a monopoly. So and benefiting too much from a monopolistic power. So now, do we need markets? And because if you have algorithms, and as I was saying, you get closer to the generation of information, it's like a distortion of time. So do we need markets? Because I know who you are. I know what price you're ready to pay now. So I don't need somehow efficient system called the market mechanism to decide the price of a product. I mean, I don't need competitors on this relevant market to help me decide the price by trying an error, So the price mechanism. I have algorithms. I'm Google, I'm Apple. I know exactly how much you're ready to pay right now for this good. And I will cross actually data sets from different perspectives, and I will very likely, with a small margin of error, target you. And I know who you are, which is a scary thought when you think about it. So, but it's basic. Google is a marketplace, and can know actually what the price is. So Google is the dream of the Soviet Union in many ways. Amazon is the same, and Apple is the same. So it questions actually suddenly our what we were valuing in the market mechanism, because Google can say, I know how to do it. So why do you complain? I am even more efficient than the market system itself. So why do it? So if we look just at the performance side, the consumer welfare and the market welfare and the overall welfare, it's true, it's not enough, and that's why I'm saying we need to also change our perspectives, and what was important before may not be may still be a little bit important. I mean, we should not forget, but maybe we should put the light on other aspects. And have a more complex, so entering into complexity thinking, so have a more complex perspective, more granular, based on the jurisprudence and certain cases and so on. Because if we keep the old jargon, actually, and the old high principles, all of them, Google, again, I mean, and the ultimate one is the price coordination mechanism, thanks to the market. Google can say, well, I'm better than the market. I go faster. I will give you a price sooner. So, and the consumer will be happy anyway. So, so we need to really actually rethink what is important nowadays, what is relevant nowadays, in our way of thinking, and adapt actually competition law to what is important, what we really want to achieve in a capitalist society. So what is the kind of new regulation we need in our capitalist societies? Not throwing the baby with the water, but rebalancing maybe a little bit, and you have a lot of examples. I mean, Amazon's a case at the European Commission that's discussed and nowadays actually. So it's really important because it goes Amazon, like Google, like Yahoo, and so on. I mean, they benefit from network effects. And it's not a technological thing. I mean, it's just a market thing. So they benefit from network effects, and they become huge. They become gigantic beyond. So the Rockefellers would dream of that, because it goes beyond the U.S. It's not only a railroad from the east to the west of the U.S. It's actually from the east to the west of the world. So it's global, and it taps into new oil, which is data. So that's why I was interested in your comment on data privacy, because we fuel that. We fuel the network effects. So as a consumer, so it's a different game. It's really a different game, and it's a new game. And so I'm not sure. To tell you the truth, I mean, I've been thinking about these issues since 2004, as I was mentioning before, looking at the power of web scraping and what we can do with that, and discovering the menu costs, actually thinking we would go to price equals marginal cost. Market has won. And in fact, it's, oh no, actually one part of the market has won. The suppliers, more maybe than the consumers. So it was a lighting time. So yeah, so I'm not sure, even dealing with these questions every day, I mean, I'm not sure I still grasp actually how fast it goes, and I can tell you, I follow these news and developments on a daily basis. So we need to, it's our time. I mean, we need to think about all these. What is a market? I mean, what are these marketplaces? What are these platforms? The level of contestability. We need to pay attention.
Professor Klein, do you want to consider? Your microphone is mute.
No, just could have a final comment. Thanks very much for the opportunity. It was a huge discussion for me, and I learned a lot with both of your papers and presentations. And I'm not studying that subject for so long as Professor Thierry, but I'm learning a lot, and I thank you very much for the opportunity. And I hope to keep in touch with you and keep learning and discussing these interesting issues.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Professor Marty, Professor Warin.
Yes, thank you very much for providing us the opportunity to participate to this seminar, and thanks to Bruno Guandalini to play the role of go-between between us. It was very a pleasure. Thanks also for the comments in live from Marcia Ribeiro, Micaela Fernandez. It was very valuable as a feedback for us, because we are in progress. Both the works are in progress, the papers are in progress, but also our reflection is really in progress, because we do not know exactly where we will go, in fact. So thank you again for your comments.
Yeah, it was a great honor to be part of that. So thank you so much, and I hope it's only the beginning of a long conversation. So and I wish you all safe and your beloved ones.
Professor Agostinho.
Just thank you once more, and I agree. We have a deep discussion to follow on after this meeting. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank you all the professors, and Professor Klein let me know that he have a little loss of energy in his house, but in the end, I want to thank you in behalf of ADEPAR for your participation, and it was a great pleasure, a great moment for us. Thank you all the audience. Thank you the Professor Marcia Ribeiro, Professor Micaela Fernandez for your participation. See you soon, guys. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Guandalini, too. Thank you, Professor.